I was astonished that there wasn't a heavy bombardment to begin with. Well, there wasn't. There was a very feeble bombardment, almost a token bombardment. I couldn't imagine how the defences were being softened up. There was, one would have thought there would be heavy naval gunfire to begin with. One would have thought capital ships would have been used to destroy the carefully prepared German defences. They were not at all, only destroyers with 4-inch guns. And, of course, there was a bit of an air bomb, but not bombers, only fighter bombers, only small bombs. 250-pounders, that sort of thing at the most, and only very few of them. But of course, as soon as the operations, as soon as the landings began, I stuck by the radio centre in this little landing craft and listened for all I was worth. And I mean, the reports coming back was, from the beginning, absolutely appalling. And it was quite obvious that there was, not only had we failed in our attempt to land to take the Germans by surprise, it was also quite obvious that we were not adequately armed to deal with all their elaborate defences which they'd prepared. After all, they'd been in occupation of that coastline, don't forget, for a couple of years, which they prepared very carefully. And it was quite obvious that we were being annihilated on the beaches. And one after another, the tank landing craft were called in. We didn't know on ours whether we were going to be the next or not. We did know that if we got there, we'd probably never come back again. So we waited in a fair amount of trepidation, everybody, for this, for the signal calling us forward. In the end, we were not. I didn't land. One or two of my colleagues did, and one of them got a very good story because he was with the commandos who carried out the only successful part of the operation on the western flank and silenced a German coastal defence gun on the cliffs. But the rest of us, incidentally, we were armed, which we all objected to very strongly, because you know that the rules of warfare are that war correspondents like chaplains don't carry arms, and if you are taken prisoner and you're found to be armed, you're immediately shot as a franc tireur. And we objected to carrying arms. Nevertheless, it was insisted upon, and I was armed. But in fact, what one did, as I expect you'll understand, is, we spent all our time hauling chaps out of the water from small boats which had managed to bring them off the beaches, and they were there, they were bleeding, limbs torn away and that sort of thing, and hauling them on board our landing craft, which was less vulnerable. And when we were full and couldn't find room for anybody else, we got the order to sail back. We were under air attack the whole time. But fortunately for us, nothing hit us. Lots of our tank landing craft went down. I mean, any number of them were lost that day. We were fortunate. We had lots of near misses, but we weren't struck. We got back early evening. A very, very sorry story. We were met by the Commander-in-Chief of Combined Operations, Admiral Sir Louis Mountbatten, for whom thereafter I never had a single shred of respect, looking as if he'd just stepped out of Gives in his smart white naval uniform, who invited us into his office, or whatever it was. We came back to Portsmouth. And then tried very hard to bamboozle us into presenting a very favourable picture of the operation, that the lessons had been learnt which would enable us next time to make an effective landing, and so forth. And there were we, plastered in mud, all over our battle dress uniforms. And Louis Mountbatten, as I say, looking almost like a tailor's dummy, and quite oblivious to the kind of stories that we had to tell him. He didn't want to hear them. And as Montgomery said subsequently, it was a great pity that so many Canadian lives had to be lost in order to teach us things that we knew already. But it was a terrible, terrible incident and a great blot on military history, I'm afraid.
Was it after this that you went to North Africa?
Yes, after that. I just finished by saying that there was, of course, extreme censorship applied to the reports where any of us were allowed to print or broadcast about the Dieppe raid. Nothing. We were not allowed to say anything for 24 hours. And even then, the facts we were allowed to reveal were we could not in any way indicate that the operation had been a failure.